Testing, 1, 2, 3, testing.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We're just waiting for a couple more commissioners to join and we'll get started shortly. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Commissioners, I'm now turning on the ability to start your video and audio.
Hello.
We know the audio is working. How is everybody? How are we doing? We managed to survive the last week, right? I mean, if you're up in the Sacramento area, you know what that was like. I mean, almost everywhere in California, the temperatures were extraordinary. Our son lives in Brooklyn, and was a day last week. I sent him a screenshot of the temperature that was on my phone. I live in Santa Barbara, which, you know, most people think, how glorious could that be? Well, it was 104 degrees in Santa Barbara. And Santa Barbara, I think, like a lot of places, because the weather is so temperate, lots and lots of homes don't have air conditioning. And so we had our libraries in town served as cooling centers for a lot of folks. But glad to see that everybody's here. Why don't I just go ahead and stop the video for a moment so I can close the door to shut my dog up.
You called that a dog?
That's what happens with Chihuahuas. You know, they weigh 8 pounds, but they think they're 80. Anyway, let us start our part 3 hearing on organic waste recycling, the Little Hoover Commission, Thursday, September 8th, 2022. My name is Pedro Nava. I'm the chair of the Little Hoover Commission and want to thank you all for joining us today. Let me introduce the other commissioners who are with us at the moment or who will be joining us during the course of the meeting. We've got our Vice Chair, Sean Warner, Bill Emerson, Gil Garcetti, Dion Aroner, David Beyer, Cynthia Buiza, Anthony Canella, and Yana Sidley. We also have some legislative representatives with us, Senator David Min, and I believe Senator Nielsen is with us as well on the phone. We have our commission staff, Executive Director Ethan Rarick, Deputy Executive Director Tamar Foster, project managers Crystal Beckham and Tristan Stein, and analyst Sherry McAllister and Ashley Hurley. There's a little bit of housekeeping I need to do. Commissioners, your audio and video will be turned on throughout the course of the meeting. Commissioners, you may mute yourself if you wish. Please remember to unmute yourself if you want to make a comment or ask a question during the hearing. The video and audio of our hearing witnesses will be turned on when they wish to speak. Members of the public will be muted during the course of the hearing. We'll have a public comment session at the end. Those who wish to make a comment will be unmuted during the public comment session. If you want to make a public comment, please use the raise hand feature in Zoom by clicking on that icon to join our public comment queue. There are some of you who may join us by phone. You may either dial #9 to raise your hand on Zoom or send an email to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov. You can see that on the screen, letting us know that you want to address the commission. Please provide us the phone number from which you have joined the meeting so we know who to unmute. Staff will be monitoring raised hands and emails requesting comment throughout the duration of our hearing. As is usual at commission hearings, public comment is limited to 3 minutes per speaker. We are recording today's hearing, and after the hearing, staff will place a permanent link to the recording on our website and then upload it to the YouTube channel and our Facebook page. So now let's talk about today's hearing. This is the third in a series of commission hearings on organic waste recycling. Today, we'll continue our focus on the state's organic recycling law, SB 1383, which requires residents and businesses to separate food scraps, yard waste, and other organic materials from the rest of their garbage. Over the past few weeks, we have examined challenges faced by those at the local and grassroots level in their experiences in trying to recycle organic waste. We've also learned about the difficulties that food banks experience in carrying out the requirement of edible food recovery. During today's hearing, we'll focus on state government implementation of SB 1383. We are in a rather unique position in that our witnesses today are people who have responsibility for portions and aspects of implementing SB 1383. In 2 weeks, we're going to hold an industry-focused advisory committee roundtable to hear from a variety of stakeholders on this topic. I want to thank again Commissioners Beyer and Cannella for serving on the subcommittee for this study and for their leadership on this crucial topic. This hearing was organized by Project Manager Crystal Beckham, and I'd like to ask Crystal to please introduce the first witness.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our first witness is Shereen D'Souza. Shereen D'Souza is the Deputy Secretary for Climate Policy and Intergovernmental Relations for the California Environmental Protection Agency. She was appointed by Governor Gavin Newsom in June 2021 to that position. Prior to joining CalEPA, Ms. D'Souza worked for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency Region 9, focusing on Pacific Islands environmental management and environmental justice issues. She has worked as a consultant and project manager on numerous environmental projects, including local climate resilience and sustainability plans and research on climate smart agriculture for UN agencies. Ms. D'Souza spent over 4 years at the U.S. State Department as a negotiator for the U.S., helping to deliver the Paris Agreement. During this time, she led the department's adaptation and loss and damage team. She also spent 6 years working on food justice issues at the grassroots level in California and served as a Peace Corps volunteer in Honduras, focusing on agriculture. Welcome, Ms. D'Souza. When you're ready, please unmute yourself and begin your presentation.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Crystal and Ms. D'Souza, this is Pedro Navan, and I apologize for interrupting, but I failed to let you know that with this commission, it is not unusual for commissioners to interrupt witnesses with questions and comments. And I would like for you to please take that as a compliment. It means that we are interested in what it is that you have to say and that you have done something that's prompted a question or comment from commissioners. So again, I apologize for the interruption. You may proceed.
Great. Thanks so much, Commissioner. Thanks so much, Crystal. And it's a real pleasure to be here with all of you today to discuss this really important topic with the Little Hoover Commission. And I'm very glad to be here with my colleagues, CalRecycle Director Rachel Wagoner and CARB's Chief of the Industrial Strategies Division, Matt Botill. Senate Bill 1383 became law in September 2016 kickstarting California's efforts to reduce emissions of short-lived climate pollutants. As you know, reducing SLCPs, also known as super pollutants, is our best opportunity for slowing warming in the near term. The bill includes goals to reduce emissions of methane by 40%, hydrofluorocarbon gases by 40%, and anthropogenic black carbon by 50% below 2013 levels by 2030. SB 1383 also set goals to reduce disposal of organic waste in landfills, including edible food, as a way to reduce methane emissions and address food insecurity here in California. Landfills are the second largest source of methane in California, contributing 20% of the state's methane emissions. Landfills are a source of methane when organic materials like food waste and green waste are broken down in anaerobic conditions. The legislation looked to the California Air Resources Board and CalRecycle, both of which are part of the California Environmental Protection Agency family, to work together to achieve the methane emission reduction targets and the organic disposal reduction targets identified in statute. Based on the SB 1383 targets, CalRecycle, in consultation with CARB, developed a regulation to achieve a 50% reduction in statewide disposal of organic waste by 2020 and a 75% reduction by 2025, including efforts to reduce edible food waste using methods that may include redistribution and composting. Local jurisdictions were required to begin implementing organics diversion programs on January 1st of this year, with exceptions for jurisdictions that applied for SB 619 to allow for more time for implementation due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Local jurisdictions are leading the way in developing their localized plans in consultation with CalRecycle to reach these goals. Cities such as Los Angeles have been making significant investments in equipment to process the collected food and yard waste, while community groups such as Compostable LA say participation in their programs has skyrocketed in recent months. So what's the difference between what CalRecycle and CARB do to implement SB 1383? There are some differences and there's also some overlap. Generally, CalRecycle has oversight of solid waste operations and CARB has oversight of emissions. The two work congruently to assure there is consistent and effective strategies used towards implementation. The implementation process, of course, has not always been smooth. COVID-19 startled the world in 2020, leading to delays for local jurisdictions to educate their residents and businesses and start their transition toward organic waste diversion. Also in 2020, CalRecycle and CARB analyzed the progress of the regulation and determined California was not on track to meeting its 50% diversion rate by 2020. Until this year, CalRecycle's regulations to meet the organic waste reduction targets were not enforceable. So it makes sense that the 2020 diversion rate required in 1383 was not met. Incentive dollars are an effective tool at jumpstarting markets, but they can only go so far. All this said, local jurisdictions are making a lot of progress since the beginning of this year, which Director Wagoner will surely highlight.
Excuse me, Ms. D'Souza. As I suggested, we already have two commissioners that have questions. David Byer raised his hand a bit ago, followed by Commissioner Sidley.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm not on video because I might lose the connection, so I apologize for that. I have a bunch of questions, but let me just start with two. What will be the total implementation costs of SB 1383 over the next, let's say, 5 years, either on an annual basis or for the total of 5 years? For the private sector, which includes residential and businesses, as well as state and local government and state government. And then the second part of that question is, what are the cost increases going to be on average for ratepayers in urban, suburban, and rural districts?
Great questions, Commissioner. I don't have those data at my fingertips, but I'm going to ask Director Wagoner if she's able to speak to them either now or when she's giving her remarks. And if not, then I would be happy to get those data for you and loop back after this hearing.
I hear you. We heard at an earlier hearing a somewhat dated estimate for cost at $40 billion, which seems like a large enough number to pay attention to. And we've heard testimony from particularly rural ratepayer organization, people representing rural areas, estimating a 100% increase in fees associated with garbage disposal. So what I'm wondering about is, if you have a dashboard, how are you doing against the goals? And what's the snapshot? How are you doing?
So neither of those are numbers that I have heard before. They seem much higher than my understanding of total costs. Again, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me. And if you're looking for information on progress towards 75% in 2025, I'll also just note that implementation became required January 1st of this year. So we're about 9 months in. Most jurisdictions have made a lot of progress in starting their organics diversion programs where they did not already exist. There are a handful of jurisdictions that applied for exemptions because they were not ready to begin the process in time. But my understanding is that there's a nearly 100%, between those two options, there's a nearly 100% compliance rate. Director Wagoner will be able to talk more about that, I'm certain. But again, Commissioner, if there's, I would be happy to loop back with specifics about total cost and cost to repairs.
Yeah, I guess in light of the recent departure of the cabinet secretary, are you the person who's in charge of the whole program?
CalRecycle has responsibility for implementation of 1383, the organics diversion program. Is that what you're asking? And are you referring to Secretary Jarrett?
No, I mean, given that both CARB and CalRecycle are part of EPA, are you is your desk where the buck stops on this program?
Well, CalEPA has a new secretary. So the new secretary, Yana Garcia, is the head. I'm the deputy secretary for climate change. I work closely with CalRecycle and with CARB on coordination on all issues related to 1383. But ultimately, I respond to my bosses, who are the secretary and undersecretary. And we respond to the governor's office as well.
Now, before I go to Commissioner Sidley, I understand that Ms. Wagoner is available and that she may have information responsive to Commissioner Byer's question.
She is. Ashley, if you can go ahead and promote Director Wagoner now, I think it might be helpful if she can answer these questions now.
Yes, Director Wagoner is being promoted.
Thank you.
And Director Wagoner, while we're promoting you, I will just tell you that the commissioners have your bio. I think we'll dispense with the formal introduction if you don't mind, and proceed to these questions.
Thank you so much for having me. And I think many of you actually I've worked with in the past in my previous life in the legislature. So we are totally fine to dispatch with the formality of introductions, but it's very nice to join all of you today. I am happy to engage in a conversation about these specific questions. Commissioner, your very astute memory of the $40 billion number for infrastructure investments is the number that we are working off of, but I would like to put a little bit of an asterisk on that number, because that is the investment of the entirety of the infrastructure that will be needed across the board, from collection systems, which more than 50% of our jurisdictions already have their collection systems in place, to those ultimate recycling facilities, everything from our co-digestion facilities, which we have built several here in California with both private and public investment, to composting facilities, of which we have roughly 160 of varying size in the state of California now. So that was a number that was formed to look at the entirety of the 1383 recovery and recycling system and say from soup to nuts what would be required in order to build a brand new system. So I think when we talk about 5-year investment needs for the state of California and local jurisdictions, it's really varying by region at this juncture. And I would say we will know a lot more about this in the coming months. Local jurisdictions currently are reporting back to CalRecycle with their capacity plans and reporting back to us on their current capacity abilities and then future needs. And so we don't have a really exact number at this juncture, as we are still collecting that data with the implementation requirements just having started at the beginning of this year.
Well, if I could summarize, we're 6 years into a law and we don't yet have a concrete number of the projected costs between now and the next 5 years until the local municipalities provide more data. Is that an accurate summary?
Well, I would say we are 6 months into, or 6 years, excuse me, into implementing a law that really only required local jurisdictions to meet the regulatory requirements of that law at the beginning of 2022. So the first 5 years were really a lot of planning on the part of local jurisdictions in the state. And we spent a lot of time working together with our local jurisdictions in developing the regulatory framework for 1383 compliance. As I know you are well aware and have heard from a number of different stakeholders, this is a relatively complicated system to put in place, from collection to recycling to procurement. And so what was really from, what passed in 2016, so from 2017 to 2021, a lot of work went into the development of the regulatory structure, and then the education system with our local jurisdictions, to which they embarked in implementation or required implementation in January.
So I take it from your answer that we can't know at this point what the impact's going to be on ratepayers because we don't know the costs. Is that a fair conclusion?
No, I think local jurisdictions have a good idea of what the cost is going to be to their ratepayers. As you know, every local jurisdiction implements their waste system differently. They have different contracts, different waste hauling infrastructure, different waste disposal infrastructure. And so many of our local jurisdictions, like I mentioned, over 50% of our local jurisdictions already have their collection systems in place. So we have seen rate impacts from a couple of dollars a month to closer to $10 a month in those jurisdictions that have implemented, and some jurisdictions that did not have to increase rates at all. So it really does boil down to the specific case in each local jurisdiction.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Bauer. Commissioner Sidley had her hand up.
So first, I want to just thank Commissioner Bauer for his questions. Many of them were mine. I do think that it is imperative that we focus on the cost of this program, the cost to ratepayers. I think we need that data. We need that data for so many reasons, but we have heard from jurisdictions, primarily rural jurisdictions, that they don't have the infrastructure to do this, and the cost is astronomical. So it also asks, where is additional funding for them if they don't have the infrastructure? Is there a path forward to find that funding for them if they don't have the infrastructure? Because although the rates may go up, as you described, $10 a month, that's quite a bit of money to some people. And so I think we need to focus on what is the reality of what this program is. I understand that there are benefits, but I also think we need to understand the burden. And I'm not sure that I have a very good understanding of those two balancing points at this point. So I guess I had more building on Commissioner Byer's questions. I had those comments. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And then after you get your answer, then Senator Commissioner Cannella has a question or comment, but please go ahead.
Thanks, sir. This is for Ms. D'Souza. I just want to understand, first off, so the CalEPA is the umbrella above CalRecycle and CARB. Is that correct? You're muted.
Yes, correct.
Okay. So we've heard testimony in our previous meetings that like CalRecycle is coming up with regulations, for example, with renewable gas that they, because people are trying to find places to put this stuff, right? Whatever it is. And renewable gas is one option. Yet CARB is moving towards zero emissions, which you won't be able to use renewable gas. And so you've got one department doing the best they can to try to implement this. And you've got another department doing their best to implement kind of the vision of the governor, and they don't match. So at some point, does CalEPA come in and say, what are we doing? We've got to kind of line these up here.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Commissioner. Absolutely. We are working very closely both with CARB and CalRecycle on how the products associated with the organics diversion can be best used, the best and highest use of the gases that are produced through co-digestion and anaerobic digestion, as well as the compost that is produced, if jurisdictions go the direction of compost. So absolutely, there's not a disconnect there within the CalEPA family in terms of the best uses. There are a lot of pieces that we have to balance, and one is certainly cost, and the cost to ratepayers, the potential for stranded infrastructure. We also have to take into account air quality regulations and the fact that parts of California have the worst air quality in the world. And so making sure that we're not further contributing to that and we're actually driving down air pollution, especially in disadvantaged communities, communities of color, low-income communities, is another priority that we seek to balance. And so absolutely, if your question is whether we're aligned and working together, the answer is yes.
Okay, it seems like there is a disconnect. CalRecycle's going forward with their goals of renewable gas, and CARB is saying you can't use renewable gas. So I do think there is a disconnect, which is causing some confusion with the stakeholders. So if you could look into that, that'd be great. The next thing is, because of some of these confusions, I mean, CalRecycle is a big organization, CARB's a big organization, and stakeholders have said that they have tried to set up meetings with either CARB or CalRecycle, and they have been unsuccessful. And people are starting to get nervous because we're approaching these deadlines where large fines can come into play. So if you can work with CalRecycle and CARB to say, hey, let's please meet with the stakeholders, work this out, I would appreciate that. And then lastly, witnesses have also discussed difficulties in permitting new facilities to process organic waste. I mean, I'm a civil engineer. I work with various aspects of government, and it is hard to do a lot of things just because agencies are so big. Well, there's also money from the Inflation Reduction Act that could go towards biogas type facilities if construction starts by 2025. And a lot of the folks are saying with the pace of permitting, there's no way we're going to be able to meet that. So it would be nice if we could kind of work together to say, look, this is a priority for California government. These are the impediments to make this happen. How can we streamline this? And when I was in the legislature, there were lots of bills to try to, I'm not going to say work around CEQA, but work with CEQA to try to expedite. And when we're looking at what we're trying to do here, we may need that. And I know the legislature would listen to you if you said, look, we've got some obstacles. So I just hope we use every tool in the toolbox to try to implement this. Otherwise, we're going to fall short. And a lot of communities, I mean, to LA, maybe it's $1. To Madera, maybe it's $50 a month, right? These are big costs. So anything you could do with that, I think would be great. So thank you.
Thanks, Commissioner. Yes, we're fully aware of the challenges associated with siting and permitting and it's not just around 1383 organics diversion implementation. When it comes to any of the clean energy technologies that we know we need in order to achieve any of our climate goals, siting and permitting is a challenge. And the entire administration is aware of this issue and is thinking through our best options to ensure that communities aren't steamrolled by too much streamlining, where community groups, environmental justice organizations don't feel like they have an ability to have a voice, and just community groups who might not want some of this infrastructure near them, and our desperate need to build out low carbon and clean energy technologies to get us to our goals.
Thank you. Deputy Secretary D'Souza, you've been interrupted, so and given the lengthy experience that you've had, such deep experience in different kinds of boards and commissions, if you feel you want to go back to where you were, please feel free.
Okay, great. Yes, unless there are any other questions at this moment for me or for Director Wagoner, and our colleague Matt Botill from CARB is also on the line. Happy to jump back to my remarks or handle however you prefer.
Senator Min.
Thanks. I actually had a question for Director Wagoner, and I apologize if I missed this. I had to step away for a few minutes, but we just obviously passed a very ambitious recycling plastics recycling bill in SB 54. And just given what I'm hearing and reading about resource constraints, do you feel like you have sufficient resources and the capacity to both deal with the organics recycling as well as the fairly ambitious recycling framework anticipated by SB 54?
Senator, thank you so much for that question. What I think both SB 54 and the previous SB 1383 and even before that 1826 all indicate is really the transition that California is undergoing in terms of our waste handling system. And as the legislature this year and last year supported, and the administration has been moving forward on building California's circular economy, this is really, really a critical time for California, for the United States, for the globe. Every government is working towards how to build the circular economy and realize the economic and community benefit of building a circular economy within their government structure. So we have been working with our local governments on 1383 infrastructure, and the legislature provided us last year $270 million investment towards the circular economy. The vast majority of that, just roughly $193 million, going towards organic recovery and recycling infrastructure. Then we also received in the budget that was just signed the night before last, $180 million additional for organics recovery and recycling, and an additional $390 million from the Beverage Container Recycling Fund to go to recycling infrastructure specific to beverage container recycling. So we have been given quite a bit of resource to continue to build out the infrastructure of previous legislative mandates. SB 54 being a new program, a new legislative mandate, will require some additional resources. But what I really look at, and the administration's been looking at with the legislature, is looking at this more comprehensively and getting back to this concept of a circular economy that builds the economic benefit, the jobs, and the community benefit into the jurisdictions of California. So whether it's 1383 and, as Senator Canola highlighted, the permitting challenges around getting that infrastructure built, or actually just making those investments in our local jurisdictions so that they can make the determinations of what kind of infrastructure is needed for their city. We are working with those jurisdictions to do that. So we will come back to the legislature this year to report back on implementation, the early implementation days of 54, and we'll need some additional resources to do that. but all of this is going to building that comprehensive picture. So thank you so much for that question, because that is exactly where we're going. How do we build this in a comprehensive way and stop looking at the end of life, but rather looking at all of these things in terms of their next life? And how can we turn what was waste into a resource that is an economic benefit to our communities and our state?
Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Byer has his hand up again.
I want to follow up on Commissioner Canella's excellent question about biofuels. And if I'm remembering correctly from our hearing in Long Beach, the issue was conflict between the use of biofuels as a interim or transitional energy source for trucks, in light of the governor's aspiration, which I share, to have an electric truck world at some point in the future. And so I guess that's really what I think Commissioner Canella was getting at, the conflict between the desire to get to electric trucks and the inability to use organic material as a fuel source, which could also be the source of jobs and economic vitality in some parts of the state. Were we misinformed, or are we missing something here about biofuels?
I can jump in with an initial response, and then once Matt Botill from CARB joins the call, he can chime in as well, or if he wants to be promoted to panelist now, he can also weigh in. But no, I don't think there's a conflict. You know, with the Public Utilities Commission, the move to increase biomethane use in buildings and residential commercial buildings will absorb a lot of the natural gas, the renewable natural gas produced in co-digestion and anaerobic digestion. My understanding is that the transportation sector, RNG, has already been saturated. There's already plenty of RNG going for transportation. Being able to absorb more would mean buying yet more trucks that are able to use RNG instead of making the shift to zero emission vehicles, whether electric or hydrogen, but zero emission essentially. So correct, we have the governor's directive, and now through Advanced Clean Cars 2 and Advanced Clean Fleets, which has been released as a proposal and will go to the board soon, but later this year. So there really is a focus on driving down transportation emissions and going towards the zero emission route. But certainly there are long off ramps for entities that are using RNG for transportation fuel, and we are building out additional uses of the RNG that would be produced. For example, as I said, the biomethane, and then for hydrogen use as well, or for hydrogen production.
Mr. Chairman, if you would like us to, we can promote Mr. Botill from the Air Resources Board at this time to answer that question as well, if you wish.
Yeah, that really is the magic of Zoom.
So,
I think I think the panelists are getting a sense of how this commission works with respect to submitting questions and comments that are prompted by the conversation. I see Mr. Botill. Did I pronounce that correctly?
Very close. Botill, thank you. Hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. My name is Matthew Botill. I'm the Division Chief in the Industrial Strategy Division at the Air Resources Board. So I want to make a couple of just real quick points on this one. And the first, in kind of, expanding on what Deputy Secretary D'Souza said, is that CARB's programs right now, and then also our long-term planning that we've been doing as part of the scoping plan, really does call for a pretty significant increase in the availability of biomethane between now and mid-century. So we're talking, potentially 4 times increase in biomethane production that's going to come from the types of waste diversion facilities, co-digestion, anaerobic digestion facilities that are going to be supporting the organics program that CalRecycle has. And so that biomethane production increase that we are hoping to see into the future means opportunities for RNG to be used in the transportation sector like it currently is, but also into other sectors as well. And so I think, you know, what some of the confusion has been here is that we have been talking about the ability for that biomethane to be used in other sectors. But, you know, we've also been recognizing that there's a role for it in transportation as well.
All right, any other commissioners want to follow that thread? So just let me check with my witnesses again. Deputy Secretary D'Souza, and I know that we had Director Wagoner who was responding to questions, but did Director Wagoner have some remarks that she wanted to make?
Thank you, Commissioner Nava. I'm happy to jump into some remarks if that's helpful. Otherwise, I'm happy to continue in terms of this conversation. I think this is a very healthy conversation. So whatever the commission would prefer.
Yeah, I'm looking at my screen. I don't see any hands up just yet. Okay. So why don't you go ahead with your comments, because I'm convinced that commissioners will be prompted.
Great. Well, thank you again so much for having me today. It is a pleasure to be here with the Little Hoover Commission. As Deputy Director D'Souza mentioned, SB 1383, authored by Senator Lara, passed in 2016, directly looking to address short-lived climate pollutants, and for CalRecycle directed us to reach a 75% reduction in organic waste to landfills by 2025, with a goal of reaching a 50% reduction in organic waste to landfills by 2020. As you heard, California has not met its 2020 goal of 50%. And as a matter of fact, in 2020, we were roughly 1 million tons over our 2014 baseline. So we had a lot of work to do. When I joined the department at the end of 2020, it became quickly clear that we had a lot of work to do to meet this ambitious but very critical goal for California to address our methane reduction goals and targets. In January, our jurisdictions were directed to comply with the regulations as developed by CalRecycle with their assistance over several years upon completion of the legislation. And roughly 50%, as I previously mentioned, 50% of our jurisdictions now have their collection programs in place. Last year, in acknowledgement of the COVID pandemic, SB 619 was passed by Senator Laird that provided some relief for jurisdictions that were not perhaps where they needed to be in terms of their compliance, to come to CalRecycle and ask for an notice of intent to comply. So ask for an ability to put in place a corrective action plan. We had 128 jurisdictions that were approved for 619 relief, and we are currently working with all of those jurisdictions to come into compliance. Additionally, CalRecycle over the last 5+ years has been working on a number of tools to help local jurisdictions comply with this incredibly important and critical goal. Everything from developing model ordinances and then assigning local assistant staff within CalRecycle to each and every one of our jurisdictions to help them on their compliance pathway. We recognize that this is a shift for local jurisdictions from previous diversion goals to really truly a mandate, and a measurable and mandate that we will be looking at in our waste characterizations to make sure that California achieves that 75% as quickly as possible. So we have developed 2 teams, one within our local assistance branch, and then the other within our enforcement branch, who really are the left and right hand of SB 1383 implementation and compliance, and working with our local jurisdictions to achieve this incredibly critical goal. I can't highlight that enough. When we reach our 75% reduction, we estimate that it is the equivalent of taking 3 million cars off of the road. This is something that we, each and every one of us, can do today that will have an incredible impact on our climate change emissions. I see that Commissioner Sidley has a question, so I don't know if you want me to take a break here.
Yeah, no, you're getting pretty good at this. Yeah. Commissioner Sidley.
I just wanted a bit of clarification. You said that you're working with your enforcement branch. So is there a current penalty for not making the requirement? And if so, what are those penalties?
So we do have a penalty structure built into the regulations, Commissioner Sidley. But if you, let me take a step back before I get into the penalties. We are very focused on reaching the 75% compliance goal. So we don't take this at, you're out of compliance, here is your penalty. We don't, as I've said in previous discussions with local jurisdictions, I'm not walking around with my ticket book. This is about, what do we need to do to meet this goal as a state? The statute is constructed, it's really, as somebody who's spent my career writing statute, this one is particularly interesting to me because it is a 75%, it is a statewide 75% reduction goal, but each local government, each jurisdiction is responsible for doing their part, but that doesn't mean we get to 75% by adding all of the 75% together. So the regulations are structured, they're very detailed, and there are a lot of different opportunities and ways that you get into compliance, which each of the sections of the regulations, so that we can cater it and tailor it really to each local jurisdiction. So what we're really focused on, and why I think 619 and 1985, I think, is the legislation by Assemblymember Rivas that passed this year. What we're really looking at are, what are the statutory and regulatory tools that we need to put in place. So if you were a local jurisdiction, if I came out today and your local jurisdiction was 100% out of compliance, my first, the first evaluation would be for CalRecycle, why are you out of compliance? What are the pieces that you're missing? And what do you need to have in place to get into compliance? And then we will either put a corrective action plan in place or work with the local jurisdiction to identify the corrective action plan that is necessary for that jurisdiction to get in place. It is about a 3-year process from the day we do that investigation to actually getting to penalties, where I am looking at each and every piece and saying, what happened here? What do we need to do differently? Chances are, if you're a local jurisdiction that's out of compliance, that you've had a lot of conversations with the local assistance staff at CalRecycle up to this point before you ended up in an enforcement place. If you haven't, that is still open to you, but our enforcement staff will then say, okay, we've identified these pieces. What is the corrective action plan that is necessary to get you to that place? So from CalRecycle's perspective and the way we've structured this, and again, it's very different than previous waste diversion goals that were based on a best faith effort. You were in compliance if you did your best. What this statute says is, no, it's not about just doing our best. We actually have to achieve the climate emissions reductions of 75% reduction of landfill waste. So what we've done is put in place a structure that says, we're going to help you get there, but no, you are actually accountable to getting to those numbers.
So let me just build on something you said. You said that it's statewide. So if I'm a local jurisdiction and I come in at 60%, 65%, and another one, Los Angeles, comes in at 85%, I can borrow their extra 10%. Is that what you're suggesting?
So that's it. It doesn't work quite like that. So that is why I was getting into the regulations. The way we determine if you are compliant with the statute is if you're compliant with each of the sections of the regulations. And then as you get into each section, whether it's procurement or collection, there are different ways that you hit your target. So we're going to be looking at overall whether or not our landfills are diverting 75% of the waste, but the way jurisdiction will be determined to be in compliance is whether or not they've done everything that's in the regulations that they're required to do. Does that make sense?
Okay, and then just one last question, and I'm sorry if I didn't see this where it was written up. How are the landfills monitored? So I know you say you have a baseline and you're tracking that, but I'm just curious is it the responsibility of the landfill to report? How do you get that data?
So local jurisdictions have to report what they are actually putting into landfills, not the specifics, not the organic versus.
They usually report weight, weight or how many
exactly.
loads, things like that.
Exactly. And then what CalRecycle has been directed to do is to go out and do waste characterization studies. So what we do is then we have a contract where we send out our contractor to then do sampling of the landfills and make a determination and report back on a study as to how much of what type of waste is in those loads.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I'm very nasally today.
It's okay. Appreciate you being here and testifying. I appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Happy.
And before I turn to Commissioner Byer, I think all of us would have to agree. This is certainly one of the more complicated pieces of legislation that we have seen in a long time in terms of what is expected of the regulatory agencies, as well as those entities that are being asked to comply. And the regulatory agencies are in an awkward position because on the one hand, you have the orientation that you set a deadline and then you push to get people to meet it. But then you want to give them 5 years of time in order for them to plan. So you either get complained about because you didn't push them too hard, or people say you spent 5 years not doing anything when that is not the case. And I actually think, as I listen to the witnesses and the questions by the commissioners, part of what might have been helpful would have been a public education process that let people know what was being done in the interim as you moved towards the January compliance. But let me get to Commissioner Byer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I think that the work that you all are doing is singularly important for climate change and for the future of our planet. And you have among the hardest jobs of anyone in government anywhere in the world. So I admire what you're doing. And so please don't construe the questions as being critical of you, either personally or professionally. I think one of the things that we've experienced, and I will end up mixing some metaphors, we're a little bit like a visually challenged person feeling the tail of an elephant. And we really don't have a complete picture. And I think that's what the chair is talking about, because we've heard from stakeholders a lot of confusion. And I think at a certain level, we're worried about the sustainability of this goal if implementation is not done in a measured way. And part of the reason for suggesting that is the rural people we heard from were clearly not happy, yet they're responsible for an almost de minimis amount of the problem. And so I think part of what we're searching for is suggestions about how to either restructure the goals by changing the effective date, or restructure the goals to, like, care courts and what the governor recently announced and the legislature passed, which is some counties are going to be compliant faster than others, et cetera. Is there a way to sustain public support for this program in a way that's different from the one that you're pursuing? Because other states are way behind California, and we don't want to set a bad example for the country or the world by implementing something that may not be realistic in the time frame that we're looking at.
If I may, Commissioner Nava.
Sure.
I think, Commissioner Byer, that is a really, really, really important question that we have been delving in over the last couple of years. So I will take it sort of backwards, the restructuring question. I would really advise, and in our conversations with the legislature last year, would really advise against changing the target. What is really critically important, and what we've heard from some of, and I think you will probably hear from some of our private investors and those who are looking to develop the infrastructure, is that regulatory certainty, that we are going to continue on this regulatory path, is really crucial to them being able to invest and build here in California. And if we start moving the goal posts, they feel like that lack of regulatory certainty does not continue that pressure. It makes their projects a lot less viable. So when we started this conversation with the legislature last year, we had a number of local jurisdictions, and I think what you have heard from some of them is everybody going into 2021 and 2022 was trying to figure out how to adjust to do their jobs in the context of the pandemic. And this is something that none of us have seen before. And so we're trying to get back to a path of certainty in a very uncertain time. And for the implementation of our organics recovery and recycling program, that proved to be truly, truly challenging, which is why the legislature passed SB 619, which again allowed local jurisdictions to say, we're not there yet, but we're working towards getting there. Can we work with CalRecycle to develop an individualized plan on when we were going to get to compliance? And that has been really incredibly successful. We've been working with 128 different jurisdictions on their individualized compliance plans. And rather than us going into an enforcement posture, we've been able to work with them to figure out how they're going to get where they need to be. So, and additionally, Assemblymember Rivas passed a bill this year that allows a tiered approach to the procurement requirements. So as you know, part of the legislation requires local jurisdictions to procure back a portion of the amount of waste that they are, organic waste that they are sending to recycling. If the governor signs Mr. Rivas's bill, it will allow a tiered approach. I think it's 30, 65, and 80, I think, are the different tiers. Apologize that I don't have that directly in front of me. So I think that there are some very specifically tailored things that we can do to get jurisdictions where they need to go in terms of compliance without moving that goalpost.
Thank you.
Commissioner Arner?
Yes, thank you very much. This has really been a very interesting conversation for someone that doesn't really know a whole lot about garbage, to be honest with you. Okay, except I live in a community where we've been doing green bins and this kind of work for many, many years. I happen to live in Berkeley, and so we're very fortunate that we're all well trained. But getting back to our previous hearing, it became quite clear that in very rural communities, right, where people kind of described, you know, my house is down a dirt road. The dirt road is not even wide enough to engage a truck to come down that road to pick up our waste, that kind of thing, right? This is happening to me in other discussions I'm having with other state agencies, where perfect becomes the enemy of the good, you know. And so is the 75% where we're trying to get to? It's that to me says that allows for the situations that I just kind of described, where let alone the cost would be prohibitive to go down that dirt road. Are we going to pave a road to somebody's house? I don't think so, right? And so that it allows enough flexibility for local jurisdictions, because we didn't pick this up in our hearings where there was lots of flexibility. I mean, people really were pointing to these kinds of examples where the truck can't get down, but they'll never get to the road. Do I have to leave the can a mile down that road? That kind of thing. And so I guess I'm hearing, does the 75% allow for that kind of flexibility, so that we are not we're not spending money that gives us actually no return at all? That's, I guess, what one of my concerns is.
Such a good question. And I love that you've brought up Berkeley, because communities like Berkeley and San Jose and San Francisco, who've been doing this for a long time, have worked through and actually are working towards their zero waste goals, which is where we really need to be working as a state. But that is such an incredibly important example. So the regulations are, again, they're 600 pages. Our regulations are very, very long, and they're meant to be that way because they are meant to tailor to different jurisdictions' needs. So in that particular example, if you have a local jurisdiction that perhaps does not qualify for our current rural exemption because their population is too high, but that it doesn't make sense to build out the infrastructure, it does allow the local jurisdiction to pass an ordinance that would allow for what is called self-haul. So I will take my jurisdiction. They actually have green waste, but I grew up in Healdsburg up in Sonoma County. You know, my grandparents' ranch doesn't have waste collection. Healdsburg could adopt a self-haul option, which would say, if I don't have the opportunity for collection, I commit as the resident that I'm either composting my own waste, which is what we did at my grandparents' ranch, or that I am hauling my waste out and committing that it is not going to a landfill. So we're not looking to exchange one environmental hazard or risk for another one, right? Building out roads and sending collection trucks in to pick up a de minimis amount of waste. But what we are looking for is everybody to do their part to make sure that that organic waste doesn't end up in a landfill. So if you already don't have waste collection, that local government can allow for self-haul. They just need to make accommodations for where that's going to go instead of a landfill.
All right, very good. Thank you. Let me check with commissioners. I want to make sure that Matthew Botill has an opportunity to contribute to this conversation as well. Is there any objection to turning our direction to CARB? I don't want to disappoint Ms. Wagoner if she had more. She says no. Okay. All right, Matthew. Good to see you.
I think she's happy to hand it to me. So good afternoon, everybody. I think, you know, in the spirit of the conversation, I'm going to skip over most of my prepared remarks, but maybe I will touch on just a few things from CARB's perspective. And as Deputy Secretary D'Souza mentioned, CARB's responsibilities when it comes to 1383 are really focused on methane emission reductions. And we focus on those methane emission reductions because they're critically important to achieve our climate targets, our 2030 climate targets, and also for the state to become carbon neutral by mid-century. And you know, what we've been doing as part of 1383, and even before 1383 it was enacted, we've actually been working on those methane reductions in California. One of the first things that CARB did was adopt a landfill methane regulation in 2010. So one of our first climate programs that we adopted. And that landfill methane regulation is in place now. We work with the air districts. We worked with CalRecycle in designing that regulation, and that helps to reduce methane from waste that is already deposited in landfills that is emitting methane at those landfills. And, you know, as we implemented that regulation, as we looked at methane emissions in California, and this is right about the time that the short-lived climate pollutant strategy and 1383 were passed, it was clear that one of the most effective ways to reducing methane emissions from landfills would be to just not deposit that organic waste in those landfills. And so, we're obviously very supportive of the need to hit our 2025 targets. That's critically important to avoid future methane emissions from waste that gets deposited in landfills. A couple of things that I think are worth noting that, you know, as we talked about earlier, the waste that has already been deposited in landfills and is going to continue to emit going forward. And so delaying any kind of diversion deadline means more methane emissions from landfills, means a harder time achieving our methane reduction targets that are in statute, and means more climate change and more global warming from those emissions. I want to talk a little bit about the future in terms of where CARB sees kind of the energy system and our emissions going into the future. So over the course of the last year, we've been working on an analysis to look at how the state achieves carbon neutrality by 2045. And as I mentioned earlier, that part of that analysis is really, what does the energy infrastructure system need to be for us to reduce our reliance on fossil fuels, to reduce the emissions that come from those fossil fuels, and find alternative energy sources that can meet our energy needs, and also reduce what we call fugitive emissions like methane that are coming from activities like landfilling and from waste generation. And one of the things that we clearly identified is that there needs to be a significant increase in alternative energy that comes online over the next decade, and that comes in the form of renewable electricity and hydrogen and biomethane or RNG, as well as other liquid fuels that are going to displace those fossil fuels that we use now. And so I mentioned this in response to one of the previous comments. The analysis that we've undertaken shows that it would be beneficial to increase the biomethane production in the state to be able to displace things like fossil natural gas use in buildings, in industry, in in transportation as well into the future. And so that is going to be an important strategy for the state, and it dovetails nicely with the work that CalRecycle is doing, because many of those organic diversion facilities and anaerobic digestion, for instance, and co-digestion at wastewater treatment plants, they provide that opportunity to increase the biomethane production in state, and then use that biomethane for energy end uses. And we've also, as part of these long-term climate planning work that we've done, identified the importance of storing carbon in soils, and compost is a good strategy for that. So, if a local jurisdiction is working on composting facilities and they're building composting capacity out, that compost can be returned back into the soil in the form of, a nutrient supply for crops, or deployed on grazing lands to help build soil carbon in the soil on those grazing lands. And so there are both energy and non-energy benefits from really accomplishing this 2025 target, and also, of course, the emissions benefits that we need for our climate. So I think maybe with that, I will stop there. That was the very kind of shortened version of my speaking notes, but I'm happy to take questions in terms of what CARB is doing in the space, kind of what we see on the emission side, and kind of what we think is in store for us over the next couple of decades as we build out this alternative energy sources that we need for getting to carbon neutrality.
Yeah, thank you. I've got a couple of commissioners, Commissioner Sidley, followed by Commissioner Cannella.
So Matthew, thank you very much for your testimony. I appreciate this. And I as Commissioner Byer, I don't want to have my question suggest that I don't see that there is a problem that must be addressed, because certainly I do. I just also trying to figure out sort of the path forward and scope out some more data here. And so you were talking about new sources of energy, and I'm just curious what the current thinking is with these biofuels and to be used in transportation or something. What is the current thinking of where you would process these fuels? What's the transmission? How would you get it into the vehicles? How would you get it into the power system? Do you need to build a new grid? What is the overall thought of how all that would actually come to fruition?
Sure. So as part of this work, what we're looking at is kind of the long-term energy transformation that needs to happen between now and ultimately mid-century. And so there would need to be, pretty significant build out in infrastructure across the state as we move towards zero and lower emission technologies. That includes, increases in the electricity infrastructure, both on the generation and the transmission side, as well as increases on the biofuels production side and on the RNG production and hydrogen production side. And, as part of this work, we're not looking at exactly where every facility needs to be and what where the siting will happen. That will come as part of implementation of various individual programs, like the work that CalRecycle is doing on the 1383 regulation, or work that happens at the CEC and the PUC on renewables. And so we do see that infrastructure expanding, and then the analysis of kind of the benefits and the trade-offs of, you know, where it's located and what its impacts and benefits are happens as part of the kind of entitlement process with those individual projects. But we do think it's critically important that they be built in the coming decade. And yeah, good.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm asking this question for a specific reason. I think, look, we're dealing with an energy crisis right now with the heat. And people who own electric cars have now been told not to plug in their cars from 4 to 9 p.m. I think that has put a chill down some people wanting to purchase an electric car because of the distance. What if I need to get somebody to the hospital? What if and all of a sudden I may have this issue. So I'm asking the question because it's a bit of a chicken and the egg. And I think that we need to have both parts of that and have these answers so that we don't put a chill in our progress. And I feel from talking to some people of just what's taking place right now, that there is a bit of questioning. Should I really be investing in this electric car at the moment? Because I could find myself in a situation, or unfortunately, do I need to be wealthy enough to have 2 cars? Do I need to have the electric car and a gas-powered car just in case there is this emergency? So I was asking for a specific question because I don't want to see us get in a situation where we stop progress because we're hoping. And I think, and so that's the purpose for raising that. So.
Thank you.
Yep.
Commissioner Cannella.
Yeah, so it's kind of along the question of Commissioner Sidley on the natural gas versus renewable natural gas. I mean, I learn stuff all the time. This is a very interesting concept. So would we be able to use the same piping network that's in the house for natural gas, for the renewable natural gas, or maybe you don't know that, maybe that's too much in the weeds, but just for my own interest, is that the way it would work?
So I saw Rachel go on camera, so she might want to also respond, but maybe I'll take a first shot at this. And with the production of biomethane and then the purification to renewable natural gas, it meets certain standards for pipeline injection. So there's purification, and then it becomes injected into the pipeline, and then it can be used in the pipeline just like natural gas would be. The state also has standards around testing that biomethane and that RNG to make sure that the constituents in there are meeting certain health-based standards. That was part of a bill passed a number of years ago. And so, yes, it can be used as a direct replacement for natural gas. That RNG can also be used to create hydrogen through a conversion process, and it can also be used to create electricity. And so it really is kind of an energy carrier that can support multiple energy end uses. And Director Wagoner, I'm not sure if you wanted to hop onto, but go for it.
You said pretty much everything I wanted to say. Senator Cannella, I think the one thing I would add is it's just a matter of transporting it from where it is being created, that you would need additional infrastructure. So if it's at a co-digestion plant, then you need that additional infrastructure to connect to the pipeline, but that can be planned for.
Yeah, and I think that's the rub, right? So we have all of these lofty ideas that would be transformative if we were able to implement them, but it's just so expensive, right? So I remember I was talking to some CPUC members when they were getting appointed, they had to go through rules, and there was this big vision of, electric cars, and they become monetized where, off peak that they charge, and then on peak they sell that electricity back to the grid, and it all sounds amazing. The problem is it's, billions and billions and billions of dollars. So I do hope I do agree with a lot of the goals of California. Maybe I don't think I voted for this particular bill, but generally speaking, I do agree. And I think it's great that California keeps pushing the envelope, because I don't think we would do anything if that wasn't the case. But at some point we've got to make a connection between the goal and how we get there. And that's money. And, we as Californians, look, I was in the legislature when this bill was passed, and I was the only heads up I got that we were getting to the next phase. I got a new can delivered with a sticker on it. So there really wasn't much education and trying to keep my kids from throwing the stuff in the wrong can. That's been very challenging. So So I hope that we can really put money behind a lot of these things, because I think they're tremendous goals. So my next question is, and this is all from the excellent staff report. I'm not just coming up with this on a whim here, by the way. But if the goal of 1383 is to kind of divert to lessen the amount of methane in landfill, I understand CARB, you guys teamed up with NASA's Jet Propulsionary Laboratory to study emissions from the landfills. I think there was 436 landfills, and you found that there was only 32 that were persistent methane plumes. So would money or our time be better spent kind of focusing on those and trying to figure out how to reduce the methane than this approach? I know there's the legislature, there's probably not, this is, maybe this doesn't matter, but just, I'm curious what you would have to say from CARB's perspective.
Yeah, happy to respond to this one, and I'm not sure if Deputy Secretary D'Souza also wants to jump in here, but a couple of points. So we, as an agency, have worked very collaboratively with JPL and others to do methane monitoring of landfills and other methane sources in California. And just conceptually, what this looks like, we have a plane and has a emissions detector on it, and it flies over a landfill for a short time period and captures a methane emissions rate coming off of that landfill. And so, we've taken these various snapshots, and what we've learned is that some of the emissions, the methane emissions coming off of landfills, can be highly variable. And so you could get a big plume one day, you fly over it the next day, and it doesn't show up on the emissions detection system. And what that's meant for us is that, once that waste goes into that landfill, it becomes challenging to mitigate completely, because you might be getting methane plumes coming off of the active phase. There might be an issue with a leak on the gas control system that needs somebody to go out there and patch and fix, or there might be something else that's happening that we can't quite pinpoint because it just disappears the next day. And so landfills are a significant source of methane emissions in the state, but once that waste gets in there, it becomes more challenging to mitigate it than if we just don't deposit it to begin with. And so hence the importance on the organics diversion targets.
Great, thank you.
Got it. Let me look at my commissioners. Do I have Commissioner Byer raise his hand?
Yeah, I want to go to the public education point that's been made by several commissioners. And first, by noting how incredibly difficult it will be for state agencies to deal with any kind of, I'll call it coherent, single message fidelity when you have 57, 58 counties and more municipalities, and they each are going to have a different system. I think the state did a reasonable job in COVID, but it was not perfect penetration or perfect message consistency. In this case, what's the big picture? How much are you going to spend on public education? What kind of messages? What kind of outside vendors are you going to use? You're going to use social media? You're going to use polling firms? How are you going to increase the visibility of what individual citizens need to do, as well as increase their understanding of why this is important and why it would be worth their money to pay for it?
Commissioner Byer, thank you for that question. And you all have really tapped on something that I think is really an area that CalRecycle wants to do more work on with our partners at ARB and our local government partners as well. So we embarked on a pilot project. We're given funding from the legislature a few years back, I think 4 years ago, to do a pilot project to reduce overall contamination that's going to landfills. So if you go to iRecycleSmart.com, you will see our pilot project that we dispatched in a couple of different localities across the state to look at, can we reduce contamination? Can we increase recycling? And among that is recycling of organic waste. We received some initial numbers back about 3 weeks ago, maybe 4 weeks ago, showing a pretty significant decrease in contamination and people understanding the importance of separating the recyclables and their organic waste. And so we have tested some public education. You've all hit on something that is a little bit more complicated because every local jurisdiction is doing things that make sense with their waste collection, hauling, and recycling system. We can't have a statewide campaign that gives specific directions to every Californian. So one of the things that the legislature did last year was give us $60 million to dispatch in local assistance grants. And many of our localities are using that to create education programs for their residents. So we recognize that right now that maybe it feels from your perspective that this is a little, I don't want to say disjointed, but needs more education. And we would agree with that point. And I think everybody just got caught a little behind the 8 ball with the pandemic hitting as we were trying to implement this new program. So we are working on how can we better message, how can we work with our localities as they implement their programs to educate their residents. We did go out and do quite a bit of press in January, with it coming online, there was a lot of interest in it. And what I did find was I wanted to do a little less press because not every local government had implemented their program. And some of the confusion comes from the fact that, like here in Sacramento, we weren't implementing until July 1. So Sacramento residents were ready to do their part, but they didn't have the avenue to do that. So as we get closer to 100% collection systems in the state, I think we would want to go back to the legislature and ask for the opportunity to do a larger statewide campaign.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that response. And I think there's any number of examples, but you do point out the difficulty with when you've got counties that are responsible for coming up with how it is that they're going to meet their requirements, which is necessary because this is clearly a scenario where one size won't fit all. And if you were to attempt to do that, you'd have a lot of opposition that you'd be confronting. But I think there might be some lessons learned. I mean, the news stories that talk about the texts that went to residents about turning down their thermostat to try to conserve. But then again, that was one thing that was simple. And lots of people have thermostats. Not everybody does, but a lot of people do. And so it was a really simple task to ask them to do. And they could feel that they were part of a larger effort, a unified effort, people working as a community to reach a particular objective, and apparently it worked. It worked pretty well. Let me take a look at my commissioners to see whether there's anybody else that has any questions or comments. I want to please express my appreciation to the deputy.
Mr. Chairman, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Commissioner Eriner has raised her hand.
I see her, yeah. But Deputy Secretary, I know that you had some other commitments on your time, and I think it was very generous of you to stick with us through the course of the meeting. Commissioner Eriner.
I just remember, I think I actually brought this up at one of the other hearings, that when recycling first started here in California and stuff like that, and people were trying to have a statewide message, that I don't know if a curriculum was developed in K through 12, but it was an interesting thing that where school districts, right, started teaching about recycling, in one generation, they could make a significant difference, because if you teach children about recycling, we all know what they do. They go home and tell mom and dad, you know what I learned in school today? I learned the importance of recycling. And so the message, because 600 pages of regulations, I have to tell you, scares me to death. Okay, I know, I'm presuming they're all needed, but boy, oh boy, to say to a jurisdiction, you have 600 pages to go through for the regulatory process, that's ominous for many people. But a simple curriculum in schools, simple things for the public as well, right? That there could be a standardized message that goes across. There are only 1,100 school districts as compared to, I don't know how many jurisdictions you're talking about, right? But 1,100 school districts is minimal compared to how many cities there are in the state of California. And so it would just seem to me that there are ways to simplify the message. It does not have to be complicated at all about, teaching a child, right? And I always say to everybody, if I understand something, that means that most people do, and I kind of understand things at the 8th grade level, but that's kind of what you're aiming for, so that you can hit most adults. But kids are marvelous teachers and marvelous messengers. And it seemed to work when school districts did this.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. I don't see any other commissioners who have raised their hands. This might be the appropriate time to express our appreciation to our witnesses for having taken time out of their busy days, particularly now that we've got such an appreciation for the challenges that you face in trying to make all of these pieces come together and work well. And it's been very helpful for us. We will be formulating recommendations based on the information that we get from witnesses and people who testify. And so just let me, on behalf of the commissioners, say once again, thank you for taking the time to help us understand this particular issue. And please accept our gratitude for the work that you're doing on behalf of the people for the state of California. Thank you. We turn it back to Ethan.
Now, Mr. Chairman, that concludes our witnesses for this hearing, so we can move on to the public comment phase of this hearing. If the staff will put up those instructions on the screen. If you are a member of the public who wishes to make public comment, please raise your hand, assuming that you've joined the meeting via the Zoom function. If you have phoned into the meeting, please send an email immediately to littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov with your phone number so we know who to unmute. So littlehoover@lhc.ca.gov with your phone number. Do that right away, and we will be able to recognize you for public comment. If you are called upon for public comment, you have 3 minutes to make a comment. The commissioners will be able to hear you but not see you while you speak. And again, if you've joined by Zoom, simply raise your hand. That's by far the best way to let us know. And so with that, I will ask Ashley if we I believe we do have some people who've indicated a desire to make public comment.
Yes, we do. We're going to start with Jim Stewart. Jim, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Stewart? Ashley, do we know, is he muted on his end?
It looks like he just unmuted himself.
Mr. Stewart, go ahead. Mr. Stewart? Tell you what, Ashley, let's go on to the next public commenter, and we'll come back to Mr. Stewart.
Perfect. Next, we're going to go to Craig Sissel. Craig, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Thank you, commissioners, and thanks for all your hard work you do on this project. I do believe, I'm hoping everybody can hear me. I do believe this is a beneficial thing for California, really. I'm in the hot seat. I am a deputy director for Butte County, kind of a smaller county here in Northern California. The problem we face with this is CalRecycle, when coming up with this ideal originally, great idea, by the way, but the problem that we face is they don't have a model as an example. At the beginning of this, I asked for a model just so we could mimic something out there that actually works. And they said, we're building the plane while we're flying it, which doesn't sit well with a lot of us landfill operators. The other thing that I want to make a point of is, here, being in Butte County, we do not have a compost facility here in our county, or really even near, that will process compost material with added food waste. And so we're actually going to have to put a contract together to truck our waste about 60 miles away one way, for those trucks to hopefully come back with compost another 60 miles. So 120 miles round trip for that material to leave our county and come back in. I don't know if CARB actually thought of the offset difference between fossil fuel consumption, road wear and tear, things like that, to the benefit of offsetting methane emissions. to me, they don't seem like they really wash each other. And I don't know if that was ever thought of. The other one that I have is CARB neutrality. Again, another great philosophy out there, but if this is going to cost every Californian $100,000 per person to meet carbon neutrality, I don't think it's a benefit. And that's what we're facing right now with this compost. SB 1383 is, in our community, our tipping fee right now is $42.11 a ton for trash. For us to do composting, it's going to be over $100 a ton. It doesn't, the cost shouldn't have jumped up 1.5 times for something so beneficial for the community. That's all I got right now. Just some talking points to throw out there that might help you make a different decision or hopefully influence. And the other thing really quick is when you bring up Berkeley, San Fran, and San Jose, those have areas of scale. You've got a lot of people packed in those areas that can actually facilitate these type of programs. Here in Butte County, we got 200,000 people. We don't have that same economy of scale to run these programs. So just something to think about. And again, appreciate all you do, commissioners. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Craig. We're gonna move on to David Rothbart. David, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Thank you. Hopefully you can hear me. This is David Rothbart. I work for the Los Angeles County Sanitation Districts. I'm also the Air Quality Committee Chair for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. We're the folks that treat wastewater. And my organization operates compost facilities, wastewater treatment plants, and landfills. So hopefully I can give you a perspective of some of the inner workings of some challenges with this regulation, SB 1383, and specifically something that I really appreciate the presentations. It really tees this up for everybody. Essentially, the challenge is really the air quality side of things, where you have to permit these new facilities and compost facilities. If they are going to take this food waste, there's challenges getting permits. Compost facilities emit compounds that lead to ozone that are very strictly restricted by the Clean Air Act, and there really isn't enough offset credits available for new compost facilities. It's strictly limited, so the wastewater sector is going to end up taking most of the food waste. And by doing this, we're going to generate this renewable non-fossil fuel. So you said, great, we could use this. This is great for the climate. It's something we could use, but we have similar limitations with the Clean Air Act and permitting. So we're kind of being squeezed into what do we do with this gas? The one thing we could do is put it into very clean vehicles that addresses greenhouse gases, that addresses diesel emissions, that addresses climate change, and everything all at once. But that doesn't fit with the vision that CARB has moving forward for electrification. And it just gets very complicated. But essentially, there's regulatory challenges that have to be resolved, and getting the air districts involved in this discussion, because I don't think that perspective, the permit limitations, are really getting discussed very well. And then bottom line, no matter what we do here, the gas that will come to wastewater treatment plants, the gas will be generated by wastewater treatment plants, needs a resilient home. And we're really not finding that. So for a wastewater treatment plant to operate reliably, you don't want sewage in the streets. So you need this treatment plant, all our treatment plants, to operate reliably 24/7. And until we have a reliable, resilient, diverse home for that biogas, we have concerns that I think can be resolved, but we need more discussion. So thank you very much. I appreciate all the comments and questions from the commissioners as well. Thank you.
Great, thank you, David. Next, we're going to move on to Sarah Desaulniers. Sarah, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Sarah, can you hear us? I believe you may be muted on your end. Ashley, let's see if we can go on to the next person and come back to her if possible.
Yes, we'll move on to Sean Edgar. Sean, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Hi, good morning. How's my volume?
You're fine. We can hear you, sir.
Great. Good afternoon. Thank you very much. I'm Sean Edgar. I'm the Director of Clean Fleets, part of the Edgar Institute based here in Sacramento. And for the last 30 years, I've had the privilege to work on public policy concerning the environment. And I admire the work of the Commission and your role in trying to seek efficiency across state programs. And really, my past 30 years in public policy tell me that there is a huge disconnect within CalEPA for the programs that you're talking about today. I say that with a little bit of authority because in 1991 to 1992, my job working in the governor's office was to implement Reorg Plan 1 with the theory and the intent that CalEPA be focused on cross-media or multimedia issues. Many of you that have been around for a while realize that, you know, along the way, we've had a variety of disjointed environmental programs. MTBE was one of those in which different agencies weren't communicating effectively. The current energy crisis is another example, electricity crisis, of how public agencies are not necessarily effective at communication. So I'll just let you know that the privately owned and operated refuse recycling companies for whom our group works in conjunction with public agencies have really been a key friend to the environment and to the ratepayers in the state of California by attempting to roll out effective programs since the advent of AB 939. And from the front row, I've had the privilege of working for the haulers in partnership with local government in order to provide quality programs. It seems like we've heard circular economy repeated several times, and I'll focus my comments and borrow from what Mr. Rothbard already told you about what the public agencies are facing. Simply because we repeat the word circular economy often enough does not mean that CalEPA is actually supporting the circular economy. And I'll give you an example of that. The RNG projects that you mentioned earlier, and Commissioner Byer was specifically talking about Long Beach and the prior testimony, and Director Wagoner talked about moving goalposts makes projects less viable, speaking about 1383. I'll just let you know that the private haulers and the organizations and the public agencies they work for have bonded and borrowed hundreds of millions of dollars to make renewable natural gas projects from anaerobic digestion possible. CARB has no better friend than the haulers. Air quality has no better friend than the haulers. And all you need to do is just look at the letters to CARB that are on the docket for the Advanced Clean Fleets proposal, which currently does not have any accommodation or credit or contemplating that more of what is working today, renewable natural gas from anaerobic digestion used in carbon negative fleets, in technology that works to pick up your organic spin, there doesn't seem to be any consideration in CARB. As a matter of fact, they poo-poo the idea that we would want to actually continue using biogas in a constructive way. Keep in mind, the companies that are using this biogas are already 3 to 7 times minus net zero, right? So if the goal is carbon neutrality, you got to go below zero somewhere. And refuse is a great example of where carbon negative fleets are working today. And all you need to do is look at Mr. Rothbard's comments. Look at the city of Roseville as a local example. Commissioner Aroner, you mentioned wanting to see examples. Well, no closer than the city of Roseville or the city of South San Francisco, where you've got public agencies locally spending their funds to solve the 1383 crisis and not finding any refuge, respect, support, understanding from CalEPA agencies who are very disjointed on this effort. So my appeal to
Mr. Edgar, your 3 minutes has actually expired. If you can wrap up quickly, please.
Yes, I'll just say, don't trash the RNG recycling trucks that are delivering clean carbon negative projects today. And please work with the haulers and the local agencies and provide a pathway in the Advanced Clean Fleet regulation that makes a lot of sense for the environment and economics. So thank you for your time.
Great, thank you, Sean. Next, we're going to move on to M. Barber. I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Thank you very much for this conversation. I'm Michael Barber. I work for San Mateo County Supervisor Dave Pine. I work on a lot of these initiatives, and I'll be quick here. The concern that we've raised, and we're urban on one side of the county and rural on the other side, and a lot of the conversation has been about the distance that the haulers have to move, and I just want to make sure that the CARB side of this is really thought through thoroughly, because the number of trucks, and I listened to the last meeting where the rural communities were talking about, you know, the amount of miles that they're going to have to drive trucks. We have the same issue, both on the rural side of the county, but also on the urban side, because part of the 1383 requires us to bring the compost back to the jurisdiction that is producing the original waste. So my concern about this, and you know, we are supportive of this law, and it's a great law, but there are a lot of mechanical pieces that need to be figured out. And for us, is this issue of, we're going to have a lot more trucks on the road. How are we going to manage the emissions from that? And the idea of hauling back tons of compost to jurisdictions that don't know what to do with the compost is a big question for us. So I'll just leave it with that, but thank you for your time, and thank you for this conversation.
Great, thank you, Mr. Barber. Next, we're going to move on to Kayla Robinson. Kayla, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Thanks, everyone. Kayla Robinson on behalf of CRNR Environmental Services. We're a Southern California-based waste and recycling collection company, and we operate one of the largest anaerobic digestion facilities in North America. So we recycle organic waste from the residences and businesses we service. We create RNG from it, and then we put it into our vehicles to create a closed loop system. And we're strongly supportive of the 1383 goals, and we're one of the early implementers of this policy, but we do want to echo some of the comments from Commissioner Cannella and others that the state is sending us really mixed signals as to where to use this gas. Some others have mentioned that CARB's draft advanced clean fleet rule is signaling that we cannot put this gas in our vehicles in the near future. And CalRecycle is actually supporting local governments that we work with to count this gas towards their procurement requirements. So it's just really a confusing path forward for us, and it's making us difficult to want to continue to invest to build out our facility further, which we know will be really necessary to meet the full scope of the SB 1383 requirements. And so just want to use this platform to really urge CARB to continue to allow us to create an alternative pathway through ACF to allow us to continue to use this RNG in the near and midterm while we work towards transitioning our fleet to zero emission by 2045. And really just appreciate creating a platform for this discussion, and thank everyone for their time today.
Great, thank you, Kayla. Next, we're going to move on to Stephen Jepson. Stephen, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Hi, thank you. My name is Stephen Jepson. I'm the Executive Director for the Southern California Alliance of Publicly Owned Treatment Works. We represent 80 public water and wastewater agencies in Southern California in 7 counties. I want to echo the comments of my colleague, David Rothbart, the Air Quality Committee Chair for SCAP. When we first heard about 1383, we partnered quite closely, our sector, with CalRecycle, and thought this is a great solution as to lowering greenhouse gas emissions from our society. As David Rothbart pointed out, composting facilities will be challenging to permit due to new source review, but our wastewater POTWs have existing digester capacity that can take this food waste. And we can generate a renewable non-fossil gas with it that we use to generate on-site power, which was invaluable during this, and is currently invaluable during this heat wave. To many of our treatment plants can operate completely off the grid, and in some cases even import some power to the grid. We also use the gas, as David mentioned, for clean compressed natural gas vehicles that run on our non-fossil biogas, replacing polluting diesels. The issue we have now is with the Advanced Clean Fleet Rule as currently drafted by CARB. It restricts, it doesn't even have a pathway for us to use our biogas in these vehicles. So suddenly we're looking at, well, how are we going to help implement 1383 when we don't have a good home for our biogas? That's a big problem. Pipeline injection has been mentioned. It's expensive, it's energy intensive to condition our gas from waste to meet the natural gas requirements. It can be done. There needs to be a gas line near the POTW that's large enough. In some cases, the gas lines would be too small. In some cases, there aren't any nearby. And it's still not an economically excellent solution for our ratepayers. And it's feeding into a system that we're trying to decline our gas use. Many cities have restrictions on gas appliances and new construction. So I'm not sure where the timing is at, but I'm figuring I'm probably pretty close to out of time. So I wanted to thank you for your thoughtful comments and the ability to comment today.
Great, thank you, Stephen. Next, we're gonna move on to Valerie Meza. Valerie, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Hi, I'm Valerie Meza. I'm recycling coordinator for Butte County. I work with Craig Sissel, who spoke earlier. SB 1383 is, I support it. However, there are some issues within the law, mainly the circular economy portion. Without existing infrastructure, it is extremely difficult for the state to reach 75% goal. And part of SB 1383 is the need to either upgrade or build an additional 50 to 100 facilities to handle the food waste. And with the issues with permitting, the time it's taken, the money spent to pay for the permitting, it's just not economical. And it's going to be very, very difficult to reach that 75%, especially for rural counties. We're 95 miles north of Sacramento, and there are several counties north of us. And trucking this product, food waste, from here to there would be extremely expensive for us without infrastructure closer. And going back to the circular economy, we do not have the infrastructure in order to create the circular economy in rural California. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. Next, we're going to move on to Carlos Marin. Carlos, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Hi, can you hear me?
We
Yes.
can.
Oh, great, thank you. I had to park at a Burger King, but I wanted to make a comment. I have been paying close attention to the three Zoom meetings from the Little Hoover Commission, and my comment was going to be regarding soil health, which is something that was touched on today by the gentleman that was talking about measuring the carbon from landfills and why some show higher methane and some lower. And that's what I was going to talk about. So in my 3 minutes, I just wanted to say, you know, the waste, we're failing to see waste, organic waste, as a valuable resource. A lot of people are talking about the biodigesters and using the gas, and that's fantastic. Using the composting is fantastic. Now, I'm not criticizing CalRecycle or anyone. It's just the research is not there yet in common scientific communities. But a healthy soil can actually capture about 20 tons of carbon from the air. And the reason some landfills are, what I'm trying to say is, if you provide the necessary conditions for organic waste to be buried, pretty much, you can generate an area of that acts as a sponge for pollutants and methane to be carbon sequestered into that area. And I know that the cost is one of the issues, and all of this can be achieved with less than 50 hectares based on the numbers from the first commission meeting a couple of months ago. So, you know, there's research coming from the University of New Mexico that show that a healthy soil actually requires half the water to produce double the biomass than it would an unhealthy soil. And that is the problem here in California. As you can see with the wildfires, Siberia is burning, the Amazon is burning, and that's because we're not providing the nutrients to the soil that could actually benefit. So to close this down, we should, hopefully some of you say this random guys is some stuff here to ask your experts if we are looking at using that waste management to provide nutrients to strategic areas in California that can regenerate the soil and can be used for the betterment of the forest. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Carlos. We're gonna try to go back to Jim Stewart. Jim, I'm gonna turn on your ability to talk.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
We can.
Wonderful, thank you. I'm so sorry, I don't know what happened. I have served for many years as the chairman of the Bioenergy Producers Association in California. This is kind of a contrary statement, but California's recycling rate declined from 50% in 2014 to 37% in 2019, the last year for which CalRecycle made this number public. This lack of more recent information is a tacit admission that its narrowly defined approach to waste management is falling short of its goals. Due to its limited focus on source reduction, recycling, and composting as the only methods of treating post-recycled municipal solid waste, CalRecycle not only missed its goal of 50% recycling in 2020, but it will never achieve its current goal of 75% recycling by the year 2025. Theoretically, from the more than 40 million tons of post-recycled MSW the state is placing in landfills each year, we could produce more than 1.6 billion gallons of low carbon biofuels or chemicals or renewable electricity or natural gas. Yet in recent years, the traditional recycling lobby, working with legislative staff and the cooperation of CalRecycle, have passed a series of legislative initiatives that have virtually closed the door on the use of 21st century conversion technologies in processing the state's MSW, effectively blocking what CARB has just said it is trying to do. However, as these repressive legislative and regulatory roadblocks do not apply to single stream cellulosic wastes, the exact same technologies that are prevented from processing MSW in California are being applied in the Central Valley to the conversion of agricultural residues to renewable natural gas or diesel, electricity, or aircraft fuel. In its implementation of SB 1383, CalRecycle is focusing on composting as a primary method of processing green waste and food waste. In doing so, it is compelling jurisdictions at the ratepayers' expense to purchase material they neither want nor need and will possibly try to resell in competition with the entities that produce the material. Why? Because adequate markets for the volume of compost recycle is mandating do not exist. Composting creates emissions, and further, with food waste being incorporated in the product, representatives of the agricultural community have expressed their concern about contamination and the presence of PFAs in the material, and therefore its potential for contaminating the foods they grow. I'm urging
Mr. Stewart, your 3 minutes has expired. If you could wrap up quickly, please.
I will with one more sentence. The Hoover Commission must expand the focus of this study to enable the conversion of municipal waste to productive products that will meet the state's need for resources like renewable energy. I thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Next, we're gonna try again with Sarah Desaulniers. Sarah, I'm turning on your ability to talk.
Excellent. Do you hear me now?
We can.
Yay! Okay. Hi, I'm Sarah Delorier. I'm the Climate Change Program Manager for the California Association of Sanitation Agencies, the members of which represent over 90% of the Seward population, where we collect and treat wastewater for the community. And just wanted to thank you all for the opportunity to comment on this. We are very supportive and fully supportive of Senate Bill 1383, as well as achieving carbon neutrality by 2045. As was mentioned in comments by David Rothbard, by Stephen Jepson, and some others, there are some limitations on compost for diverting all of this organic waste and food waste in particular to those areas. So we had participated in a study by the State Water Resources Control Board that was named the Co-Digestion Capacity Analysis that was distributed in 2020, August of 2020, that showed that anaerobic digesters, existing anaerobic digesters at wastewater treatment facilities can accept all divertible and digestible food waste and co-digest that with our sewage sludge to capture and generate this biogas for our use. And that could increase in some cases across the area, the production of biogas by any double to 4,000% increase, depending on where it's at and what the existing biogas production was. We do use this primarily to generate energy and heat on site for our own uses and for our energy independence and resilience, especially during times like these, during the heat wave or other disasters. But we also are looking at and have used it as a transportation fuel, low carbon, low NOx transportation fuel, as well as explored pipeline injection. But as was mentioned earlier, there are some limitations on each of these uses. It's not a one size fits all for all or one use fits all. So we really want to maintain all uses and would like to encourage that in the scoping plan update that is being written now, and as well as in the advanced clean fleet regulation that's drafted right now, where we don't have as much flexibility. And in the meantime, as we said, we are fully supportive of going carbon neutral, and as part of that, investigating and demonstrating or working in partnership with CARB and air districts to demonstrate the viability of biogas to hydrogen as a clean fuel for transportation use or on-site use. But we still need the use of this biogas for all use, all those different uses we mentioned, for our own resilience, to protect the public health and environment, because the water quality is first and foremost what our objectives are as part of its treatment. I don't know where I'm at with my time. I just want to make sure I got that message out and that we are fully supportive, but we also need to work on an extended transition for our own purposes to completely electric vehicles, because they're not available right now for our purposes. So we need a way to be resilient, but also ensure the use of our biogas, which we will produce in perpetuity. So thank you very much for the time today, and hope that was useful.
Great, thank you, Sarah. Looking at our Zoom and email, we do not have any additional requests for public comment.
Very good. Thank you, Ashley. Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes our agenda for today. I would just mention briefly that 2 weeks from today, Thursday, September 22nd at noon, we will have an advisory committee roundtable discussion on these organics issues. We'll be providing the commission with more information about that in the coming days. And for the newer members of the commission, these roundtable discussions can be very rich discussions. And then the next public hearing will be a little more than a month from today, October the 13th, Thursday, October the 13th. And that will be our first public hearing on the developmental disabilities system. So those are our next two meetings, Mr. Chairman. And other than that, I think we've concluded the agenda for today.
Thank you very much, Ethan. Before we sign off, any commissioners, any comments before we conclude the meeting? Seeing none. All right. Looking forward to seeing you the next time. Thanks again for participating.